Hello, everyone, and welcome to the AIPAD Talk series, Depth of Fields. This series focuses on AIPAD member galleries and the artists that they are currently presenting all around the world. I'm NJ Shung, Partnerships Manager at AIPAD and the Photography Show. We hope you will join us at the next edition of the Photography Show, taking place at the Park Avenue Armory in New York from April 22nd to April 26th. I'm so excited to introduce artists Amanda Marchand and Leah Sobsey. Marchand and Sobsey will be discussing the creative practice and exhibition currently on view at AIPAD member gallery Rick Wester Fine Art. Rick Wester will also be joining this discussion and hosting a Q&A with the artist after the talk. Please feel free to ask your questions in the chat box throughout the talk. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining us. And before I dive into questions for Amanda and Leah, I just want to thank AIPAD and thank Irene and NJ for organizing this. It's been a wonderful process to work with them. And I have to thank Lydia, too, who's the director, executive director at AIPAD. And just so that you know, we're speaking from the gallery, and Amanda and I are in person, and Leah is at home in is it Raleigh? Raleigh, Durham, is that where you're?
Durham, Chapel Hill.
Right, Chapel Hill. So just a brief introduction of each artist. Amanda is an award-winning Canadian, New York-based photographer. Her work is takes an experimental approach to photography using the natural world and focuses on our changing climate. Leah as well has explored the natural world in her work, and that's sort of where they came together in graduate school to start collaborating and thinking towards a project that they could do together in the near future. In some respects, I think that it's no accident that they came together because their concerns are very much aligned. And this Earthen Door, the project that we're going to be talking about, is a full exploration of those interests in using imagery and the natural world in their work. So we're just going to get right into the questions here and get started. The first question that I have, which is really the most obvious, is how did the project come about and why Dickinson?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you so much, Rick. Thanks to AIPAD. We're delighted to be here, and thanks to everyone who is joining us today. Leah and I met in graduate school at the San Francisco Art Institute just a little while ago, and we had so much that was similar in the way that we approached photography, because we weren't straight photographers, but we were really interested in process and materials, and photography is something that was plastic and malleable and ever-changing, and sort of what was the new frontier in photography was something I think we were both always curious about. So when the pandemic happened, Leah said, you know, we've talked a little bit about collaborating over the years. This might be the perfect time. And we started asking each other what might be a perfect topic. Now, Leah had been working with Henry David Thoreau's herbarium in a collaborative project that was shown at Harvard, and I had been working with endangered species. So we gravitated towards Dickinson's herbarium, a beautiful book of pressed plants at the intersection of art and science that was tucked away in at Houghton Library and would never be seen again. And I think that we were just drawn to it automatically. We had always coveted it. And because of our similar crossovers with the way that we approached photography, we thought we might be able to do something with that subject matter. We also wanted to work with a woman. We knew that we were going to do something that had a feminist bent. And that was what we started with maybe 6 months into the pandemic. Leah?
Hello, everyone. I'm going to start again and share my screen again and start the slideshow. Okay, you can see that, hopefully, and hear me. Right, Amanda, was talking about how we began the project and how we both kind of came together aligned in terms of our own practice, and then landing on Dickinson's herbarium. So here you can see the original herbarium. Dickinson was really known as a botanist in her time, and she made this beautiful book of pressed plants that now lives at Houghton's Harvard Library. It's too fragile for anyone to ever see again. And we were really interested in that as an object and thinking about, how do we hold something that is now never to be seen or touched again? And so we landed here at this beautiful book of pressed plants that Dickinson made when she was a young girl. It's thought to have been made around the time that she was 14. And we were really interested in it, and thinking about this as a way to talk about kind of the state of the world, thinking about all of these ecological issues that we're looking at and facing, and thinking about using a practice that is more eco-friendly. And so this was what we landed on here, Dickinson's. And Amanda, maybe you want to talk about this slide for a minute.
So the work that we ended up making, this Earthen Door, pulls from many different places. It pulls from art and literature, poetry, pulls from science. It's inspired by nature, and it also is inspired by color. It's a very colorful project. And you can see from this slide, this is Werner and Syme were two geologists in the 1800s and into the 1900s who invented basically the first Pantone when a system for color didn't exist. Leah and I were very inspired by these color swatches, and the project is a nod to them as well.
Maybe you can discuss a little bit the sort of the materials and processes of creating the project. We sort of skipped over the fact that you hearkened back to the 19th century for a process to work with the images of the herbarium. Maybe talk about that a little bit, and why in particular did you choose that process?
Sure, I can start. So here you can see an example of Dickinson's original herbarium on the left and then ours on the right. And so we landed on using the anthotype process, which is a historical photographic process that was discovered around the same time that Dickinson would have been making her herbarium in the mid-1800s. So for example, thinking about the anthotype in this image on the right, this is made with the juice of pokeweed. And so what Amanda and I did, this book of 66 pages, we decided we would remake this book with the pigments from plants as anthotypes. Harvard allowed us access to their archive, which was wonderful. And we were then, given the opportunity to work with this as a digital archive. So we split the garden in half. There's 66 pages to this book. It's filled with 424 plant specimens that Dickinson collected in and around Amherst. Again, she was really known as a botanist in her time and as a gardener, not as a poet. And so we split it in half. Amanda grew 33 of the plants in her garden, and this was when she was in Quebec in Canada during early COVID. And then I grew the other 33 at home in North Carolina in my garden. And it was, yeah, go ahead.
All right, I want to clarify one thing. So you all decided to emulate Dickinson's process by growing the plants themselves. So you were really digging into the origins of what she was up to as a gardener, right?
We decided that we we would use plants that she had grown in her garden or collected in the meadows and forests of Amherst, and that we would grow them at home as well. So that's what we did. We grew them, and then we used them in our material process, the anthotype, the ones we had grown, and they match what is in her original herbarium, or they're analogous in the case of ones that are endangered, and et cetera.
So out of the 420 some odd plants that were known from the herbarium, how many did you end up growing? I mean, I know there are 66 plates, one for each page in the herbarium, but were there, pages where you felt like you had to, try 2 or 3 different plants to get the image right?
Well, we grew 66 or collected, like there's a few wild ones that I collected in Quebec. So they were just up the road. The ghost pipe, we had to source that. That was a special flower for her. So we had to source that, but then Leah ended up finding it near where she lived in the end. That was the only one that we really didn't make our own anthotype with originally. But the plants were ones that she also had, they were special to her. She grew them, she collected them. Was there another part to the question?
No, I think I know we're going to get into this a little bit more deeply. I just wanted to.
And the 66 pages of her herbarium, we did one different plant for each page. And in many cases, we made mistakes. Anthotypes didn't work. They got rained on. There were many misses. And we actually did 3 or 4 anthotypes per page because we did positives and negatives. And we didn't know what they would turn out, if they would work well as a positive or negative. We did different methods. So we did many more anthotypes than you see in our final book.
Right.
Yeah, and really, I mean, this project is so much about time, thinking about this long history of Dickinson and collecting, and this time span between her original and then us remaking this book. And then also time in growing the flowers, growing the plants, and then also time in exposure. So for those of you that don't know, anthotypes can take a long time. They get exposed to UV sunlight. And, our shortest one took an hour in the sun, and our longest one took over 3 months to expose to the UV light. So it's really, again, a kind of I think in a way a nod to the making of a photograph, that it's capturing time in a particular way, and in this case a very long period of time in terms of an exposure.
And to
Okay.
Dickinson, our muse, who we think of as we're holding the hand of a ghost. So the early process of photography to now, and the different digital tools and early photographic tools that we use.
I'm moving to another little section of slides that was from a recent show at the gallery, at Rick's Gallery in New York. So we can kind of talk through some of those as well. And this show it just closed relatively recently over the summer. It's great to have in the space.
And in the process of making these images, working from the source images from Harvard, from the herbarium, what revelations did you have that you feel afforded you the most insight into Dickinson? And how important was that in terms of how did that reflect on how you continued the project?
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest revelation was just when Leah and I did this little self-imposed residency, when residencies were closed down in the pandemic, and we brought books of poetry and biography books on Dickinson. We realized the degree to which she was an early naturalist and had studied botany, and she was she saw flowers as friends, and we really got an understanding the depth that was true and how that had influenced her poetry. And that's when we knew that this project had to be made with plants. So I think that her stature and status as a sort of early eco reporter, before the word ecology was even invented, was something that was key for us.
And Leah, can you go back to the previous slide for a second?
Sure.
And so here we're looking at an installation view of the piece To Make a Prairie, correct?
Mhm.
Can you, what are we looking at? What are all these colored rectangles about?
Yeah, well, so our project is a sort of two-part project. The first part is the 66 pages, the reimagining of Dickinson's herbarium, the remaking of that, which has those botanicals like the ones that you two are sitting in front of, made with marigold and delphinium. And then we have the second part of the project where we collaborated with scientists. And we really wanted to imagine what would, a 21st century herbarium look like. So we felt like it was critical to partner with these scientists, Peter Grimma and Kira Krako. So we'll talk a little bit about in a bit. But we felt like in order to really understand the plant science, we needed more information. It was not enough to just have these beautiful kind of remaking of her herbarium. So in this case, we have 33 plant stories that are really data drawings. So each one of these has information embedded in it. And in this particular one, To Make a Prairie, which each of the titles of these data drawings, or chromataxis as we call them, lifts from a Dickinson poem. And this one uses the pigments from all the plants in the project that don't need outside pollinators. Amanda, you can talk a little bit more about that if you want.
Sure, they self-pollinate. So we have another one that shows all the pollinators that would have been in Dickinson's garden, but these can self-pollinate in hard times, and that's fantastic for the survival of the species. But there's also the drawback is that they don't generate as strong a population because the genetic pool is weakened. So there's a plus and a minus. And in these plant stories, we just touch on different ecological points that we felt were interesting, and many relate to Dickinson or compare her time to now.
Yeah, I mean, we really think of this, as a photographic project, but also a research project. I mean, we spent at least a couple of years researching Dickinson, her background, her poetry, and then also these plants that we were working with. It felt really important to tell the full story.
Researching and very much guided by the two scientists that Leah mentioned, who gave us such a bounty of information and answered every single question.
Yeah, it's incredible. Mm-hmm.
So much of the project is really dependent upon the sensitivity to the cultural, historical, and artistic sensibilities of the United States in mid-19th century, really in the pre-Civil War years. How did those concentrations affect what you wanted to explore?
Well, I think for a start, what was true in Dickinson's era was that for women, especially, botany was the back door to the study of science. They couldn't study science, but they could study botany and flowers, and the language of florography was central. That we were really drawn to that there was this feminine language, it's kind of like a Morse code of flowers, and that this has been lost. And along with that, a reverence for nature. It's seen in Dickinson's poetry how special an individual flower or plant is in any given poem. And we were really drawn to that. So that's sort of a part of the setting. Leah, maybe you can talk about another part.
Yeah, I'm trying to get my dog not to bark. Um, yeah, I mean, I think, in this way, as Amanda talked about, this kind of backdoor to science for women. I mean, we think of this as a kind of, an ecofeminist project, this kind of tending to, for us, tending to the garden and tending to the stories in a way. And as Amanda said, this connection to the natural world, which was key for Dickinson. She, like, half of her letters that she would write to people contained, flowers, contained the connection to the natural world. And you see that in her poetry if you read it. And so that really informed her way of working, and then in turn ours.
And she was also such a groundbreaking poet, and her first book was a book of plants. Essentially, she was only published after her death, except for a few poems published in her lifetime. So this herbarium, which one of our scientists, Peter Grima, has just published a new article that, well, it's been understood that she was a teenager when she made it over a few years, that could be put into question. It might be possible that she was reinserting plants and leaves and working on it in her entire life, and that would almost bring kind of a new light to her poems in the physical act of tending this herbarium, this archive, as it influences her writing.
So
I'm going to
in
move
effect,
to the next slide here just so we can start the video in a minute.
okay. So in effect, the two of you were really in conversation with two 19th century women, right? With Dickinson, obviously, and also Mary Somerville, who's credited, I guess it's through Herschel, that for inventing the anthotype, although I think there's some question as to whether she was actually.
Yeah, we can talk about that. Maybe we'll get the slide the video going. We have a long video here. Do you want to introduce it?
Yeah, I'm just gonna start this video walkthrough that we have. We just had an exhibition at the Brandywine Museum of Art in Chadds Ford, right outside of Philadelphia. And that just closed, but I have a video that I'm going to show that kind of walks through, which is a nice way to see. We have 100 pieces in this project, and at the Brandywine we had about 50. So it's a nice way to kind of see how we organized the space and get the full extent of the work. And now, of course, I'm trying to find this video, and it has
But to answer
disappeared.
the question, we did have two muses, Dickinson at the center, and then that's sort of the art piece, the poetry, and then the science piece was that Sir John Herschel is credited with inventing the anthotype. But when we started this project, both he and Mary Somerville were credited with that. And then 2 years in, that changed. And there was something that was found that predated her findings, but she had published her findings on anthotypes through a letter to Herschel, but shortly after he gave a public presentation. But the thing is that women were not allowed to publish. They were not allowed to publish their findings. And this woman who was in conversation with Herschel, she was a Scottish Victorian polymath, mother to 6 children. And she was so prolific in her inventions and experimentation that she is actually the person for whom the word scientist is named. So Somerville, it was only man of science, and then they said, well, she's doing so much for science, we need a new word. So scientist was coined after Mary Somerville. And we really loved, in the pandemic, we were at home with our children and our children and our families, and doing all the things that we were doing, making meals and et cetera, and working on the project, and that she would have been at home ironing her anthotypes to try to make them more light, fast, and experimenting with different chemistry with her 6 children running around too. So she's a key player in our artistic imaginary.
Do you want to comment a little bit on the content of the video? Like what are we looking at now?
Sure. Yeah, it's going to move in a second, but this is basically the making of an anthotype. So in this case, we sort of use 2 different ways. We use the traditional way, which is a mortar and pestle, which you see there, and alcohol, and mixing that with typically a handful of flowers, and that gets mixed to the point where it becomes kind of liquefied, and then you can paint that on to paper. In our case, we used a sketchbook paper. And then the other way is that we kind of made up, I think, we hadn't really seen it before, was actually just making rubbings. So taking plant matter and rubbing it directly onto the paper. And that's what you see here, these different kind of mark makings. So, in some way, yes, it's a photographic project. In other ways, we're, adopting painting and drawing and mark making in that way. So you really see that in this particular case. This is the Earthen Door. This is the grid of all the browns from the project, which there were a lot of. We kind of tell the story that when we were making these in the beginning, I was in North Carolina in the summer. It's hot and humid, if anyone knows, and Amanda was in Quebec, and it was. We would get on Zoom every day to communicate and show each other with excitement what we were getting. And Amanda would be, dressed with like winter clothes on, essentially, or at least I felt that way. And she was having these very slow exposures, because it happened to be a really kind of, I don't know, dreary summer, I think, in Canada. And so these exposures were taking a really long time. And I was in this hot, humid, sunny North Carolina. And so just the discrepancy in terms of what we were learning about the process as we were making, that some of these exposures go very quickly in the sun, others take a long time, depending on where you are, just in terms of location. And so that was a kind of interesting thing to note. We have a book that we'll talk about in a little bit, but one of the things in the book that we did was we kept track of like a timing chart. And again, thinking about this as a kind of research project, we felt like it was important to track all of that. So for each plate that we made, we give the, how long did this exposure take? Where did it take place? Down to the hour and the minute. So it's a real kind of, again, kind of charting of this process.
And again, looping time, the theme of time into the work in a very physical way.
And just to clarify that the anthotype itself is really transient. The pigment is transient. It's fragile, right?
They're fugitive.
Yeah.
And we knew started with the idea of a book. We wanted to remake her book as a book. That was the impetus. And so we just knew everything would get recorded and scanned in because the colors would be fading. And so that became a part of the project. We started with that idea of the book. And so built into the project was the physical material nature, as well as scanning in the images, recording them, and faithfully trying to replicate what our originals looked like to preserve them.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about this project, is that, just to kind of reiterate, I think it gets a little confusing for people in terms of thinking about the plants themselves. So what you're seeing are Dickinson's pressed plants. You can, in some of these, you can even see her writing. And then we were given permission from Harvard, like I said, to use the digital archive. And that's where we made large black and white negatives and used those. So, I think one of the things that we love about this is you really see Dickinson's hand in them. She was really, she took a lot of care in the way that she was working with the specimens, placing them on to the page. I've worked with Thoreau's, like Amanda said, and they're really sloppy, and there's just a very different way and approach to how she was working with them.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're stuck here.
And I'd also say that point of mystery was something that we alighted on, the fact that we would never see her book. We would never be able to touch it. Nobody can ever see it again. And so that working with a digital archive was our starting point. So we began with a digital negative that had been, it was a photograph of the original. We never saw the original object, and nobody really ever will. So that was a real, it's something that when we think about the work as a work of photography, its inception was photographic. So it's kind of wrapped into the language of the project to start with a digital archive and then end with these prints that were translated again in that manner.
And we've seen a few slides of the images of the original herbarium, but if anyone's particularly interested in going through the herbarium, the images of it, it is on the Houghton Library's website under the Emily Dickinson collection page. And I think, well, it was last time I checked, it was on the homepage of the Dickinson collection. So if you just Google that and go to the Houghton Library website, you can click on that right away and go through all 66 pages in the herbarium.
Yeah, and in this little room, we sort of broke the show up into 3 different sections, thinking about Dickinson, thinking about the anthotype process, and then thinking about the kind of ecological issues facing the plants that we were working with. And so here you see this is the sort of Dickinson room. And if you've been to the Dickinson homestead, which is in Amherst, Massachusetts, you'll recognize this wallpaper. So this is the wallpaper that lives in her bedroom, and they gave us permission to use that. We blew it up about, I think, 4 times as large as it is. So these are tiny little roses in the original wallpaper, and we really liked thinking about the scale, since we were playing with scale with our own work, and really being able to see the roses in a different way, just like we can see the plants in a different way in our anthotypes.
So
Yeah.
question which just popped into my head. So what, as a reminder, what we're looking at are, it's a video of the installation at the Brandywine Museum of Art. And the Brandywine is a very interesting institution because it incorporates conservancy as well. So can you just comment, how significant was it for you to show this work at the Brandywine in particular?
It was an amazing marriage between, our project and this institution. They have a conservancy effort that is a massive part about how they run their programming. And we worked with primarily Kevin Freiberger. They have Waterloo Mills and what's the other one, Leah? Blanking on it.
What's that?
Waterloo Mills and
The Laurels.
The Laurels Preserve. So there are these 2 conservancies run by 2 different people. We worked with one of the land stewards, came on board and really helped us, talk about what were the primary concerns ecologically for them as stewards of the land and how we might work on some site-specific pieces. So we ended up making 2 of those pieces. One is on the trees native to the Brandywine region. Another one is on the invasive species. And not just this, but just the fact that runs along the Brandywine River and ecology is so central to their mission made this really a perfect fit for us, and really a joy to collaborate in this way and in a larger way with them.
So they reached out to you to commission you to do these 2 pieces.
Yeah, I mean, it came up as we were looking at the work. I mean, part of what we have been drawn to, we were drawn to Dickinson's original herbarium, like we talked about, part of this way to understand her work, part of the way to understand plants, and this kind of shift in the natural world and plant loss. A lot of what we have talked about in our project has been these ecological issues. This is the tree piece. And so we really wanted to do something site specific. So we felt like, because this was such an incredible, kind of harmony of art and science, when we were there, we thought, wouldn't it be pretty amazing to do something? And so we had this, kind of dreamt it up, and they immediately were excited about it. So it was this really very kind of beautiful marriage, that came together just based on their mission and based on what we were wanting to play around with in terms of looking at, the local. And yes, Dickinson's were still at the heart of it. So in this particular piece, these are the invasive species from the Brandywine region that overlap with the plants that were in Dickinson's herbarium. So we wanted to still keep within our project And so same with the trees. We worked with the trees that were, native to the Brandywine region, and that they had this mission, to repopulate the trees based on the tree loss from the hurricane. And so that gave us kind of a boundary in a way to still work within the project. So, we did the research again with Peter Grimma, our one of our botanists, and Kevin, to really understand what was growing there, and then also what was growing, what was represented in Dickinson's of her 424 specimens.
Yeah, and we went back multiple times and foraged and worked with Kevin pretty at length for about a year to make those two pieces that Leah just shared.
Yeah, and we have more of that work. This is almost coming to an end, I think, in this video, and then we can show more stills of those and just kind of talk through the process a little bit more, because we made a shift in terms of, working with Dickinson's original pressings that then we were given access to through the digital archive. And this time we actually made our own pressings. So we departed a little bit in terms of how we had been working, and spent, a year collecting plants under the guidance of Kevin, and then making those pressings and then extracting the pigments from those plants to create those colors that you're seeing here. And I
Did you
think
create the actual herbarium? Did you save examples of the
we
plants
have
that you?
them. Yeah, we still have them.
Yeah.
I'll stop sharing and I'll go back to the slideshow, and hopefully that will, we can go back through some of these images, and we can talk about our book a little bit too. Share my screen again. All right, hopefully you can see that in my very messy desktop. Okay. Yeah, so just to transition for a minute since this slide is up, and then we'll come back to the site-specific pieces. One of the things, and again, in kind of thinking about collaboration, we've collaborated with two scientists, with Peter Grimma, who is based in Western Massachusetts, a botanist and a Dickinson herbarium scholar, and also Kira Krakos, who is in St. Louis at Maryville University. And also along the way, other Dickinson scholars, Marta Werner and Marta McDowell. And, this work really is about collaboration at the heart of it, between, myself and Amanda, and then all this kind of web of collaboration. And one of the things that we also got to do, which was really exciting, was to collaborate with DATS Press, which Amanda has published books, a number of her books with prior to this Earthen Door. And they're in Korea, and we were able to go to Korea to work with them. And so it's just this kind of extension of collaboration, which has been really critical to thinking about this project. Our book here, like Amanda said in the beginning, we
just going to add, include the Emily Dickinson Museum and the Emily Dickinson International Society. I mean, it's beyond just us and our project. There have been so many hands at play in it.
Yeah, I mean, we really have felt like this is not a project that could have happened with a single artist, just in terms of the magnitude, like we said, we have 100 images in this project. And also just what it means to collaborate, what it means to work with somebody else, the significance, the importance. We felt like as two women coming together, to kind of keep this way of understanding Dickinson alive in a way that she wasn't, we don't know her in this time period as a gardener, and connected to plants in that way. And so it felt really important, I think, for us, just thinking about how all the ways that we tend to collaborate. So included in this, for example, you'll see this little piece of handmade seeded paper, and it has a poem with wildflowers embedded into it. You could plant it. And the book is both in English and Korean, which we love, that, again, thinking about the way that Dickinson has this kind of global audience.
Sorry, you said wildflowers, but it's wildflower seeds. So you can plant and water the paper and it will grow flowers from that area that she lived in Amherst.
So that piece of paper that you just showed has seeds embedded in it.
Mhm.
And
the poem To Make a Prairie.
right. And the idea is that you can actually take that sheet and plant it. And have you done it? Have you tried it?
Well,
Does it work?
DATS has done it. Yes, they do. They sprout.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, I think most people feel like it's a little too precious, but life is short, you know. Yeah. And here we are in Korea. We taught a workshop, which was really wonderful. And you can see us holding the original, not the original, a copy of the herbarium that Amanda has, which is actually an Italian version. And we led a 3-hour workshop where we were teaching people how to make the anthotypes.
Did you ever feel like you were time traveling?
I would say definitely with between herbaria and Dickinson and the early photography that is, that we took the reins on the anthotype, there was a lot of back and forth through time, and that conversation is,
Yeah, because you're really spanning like the full history of the medium. And since AIPAD is an organization based on photography dealers, I think there's certain relevance to this. So we're really like talking about a vector from 1845 to the present day.
Yeah, the 1830s, Herschel was experimenting with anthotypes. They were trying to invent color photography, and it proved to have so many problems and not be light fast, but it was one of those initial efforts to move the medium forward in that direction.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And what are we looking at here now?
Yeah, so this is some of the work from the site-specific piece that we made of the trees. And you can see our native trees from the Brandywine region. And for every pigment we extract, we make a little smudge. So again, this kind of record keeping, this research project, and these all with our Earthen Door project in our book live as little smudges. So you can kind of see what each color creates when you smudge the flower directly. And these are from the trees. So just the making of those. And there's the tree piece again. And, I think we said we went over the course of the year. So the top panels are all in the fall, and the bottom panels are all in the summer. And you really see how different, the pigment changes based on the seasons, and a kind of nod again to time and this kind of cyclical nature. And here are the native trees in conversation with the invasive species in there. And I think we have just a few more slides that kind of look at some of the way that we prepared. So in this particular image, you're looking at the beginnings of a pressing, so just collecting plants, and then those would get put in the press, which you can kind of see the screws for there. And those get pressed for, I think what we did about a month, maybe, Amanda, and then those come out and we have these lovely pressed plants. And then again, kind of incorporating the photographic element, we scan them and we make negatives from those. And that's how we make our exposures. And here you can see this wide array of colors. On the right, we have wineberry, we have daylily, we have different honeysuckles that are all, invasive to the Brandywine region.
And we were really excited to do this collaboration with the Brandywine because it jumps off from the Dickinson project, which was 4 years and some, to local ecologies, which we explored when we were in Korea working on the book. We did a site-specific piece with the Korean mountain that the museum is on, and the residency we were at, working with the native plants there, and then working with native species to the Brandywine region. And this is sort of what we're hoping to do a little bit more going forward. So this has been like a really great jumping off direction.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've talked about, is just our kind of disconnect from the natural world. We all are tethered, as we are now, to screens and to devices. And I think this kind of knowledge of the natural world, we've lost to a certain degree. you know, Dickinson knew the woods around Amherst, the fields like the back of her hand, and she could point, you know, she could tell you where a single orchid would be blooming at a particular time and on what hilltop. And we feel like just this idea of like how to bring that connection back to the natural world. And so for us in this way, working with different local ecologies, you know, in terms of institutions that we've worked with or DATs that we've worked with, we've led workshops when we went to a conference in Taiwan over the summer and did a workshop. Amanda led some at the Brandywine. And so this kind of invitation for people to pay attention, and how that allows people to create a kind of empathy for the natural world, which I think, you know, we're in this time period where we're losing a lot, and we are, you know, we are facing floods and fires and hurricanes, and, you know, looking at climate change. And so for us, it's an invitation again, you know, to bring people into this conversation.
Yes, there's a term called plant invisibility where we
Right.
look at nature and we see all the same tree, all the same plant. It's all just green. And we've lost that ability to connect intimately with the different kinds of trees and flowers. And this project has really opened up our eyes to the different species and what might be endangered in one region might be definitely not endangered somewhere else, but could be invasive, and how plants are, you know, so unique and different and each have a history as well as symbolic and big, you know, through time. The uses of the rose, for example, they have these amazing histories and this ethnobotany attached to them that has been so rich and wonderful to explore.
And I think the last slide that we have is this one. And this is our collector's box. It encompasses all 100 images of the project. If you're interested, Rick has it in the gallery. You can check it out. And we just felt like, you know, this was a way to house the whole project. You know, the images can be seen as singular images, but, you know, as we think about archives and a collection of images, we really wanted them to exist together. So these are, you know, the size of our project, in the smallest size, the 16.5 by 21 inches. So they're quite large, you know, as a collection.
And we can also, if anyone's interested, send you a link to an online viewing room of all the images in the portfolio, and be happy to make appointments for people to come in to look through the portfolio itself, for sure. We're sort of closing in on our Q&A time. Is there anything either one of you want to say to sort of wrap this up before we take questions?
Well, thanks to you and AIPAD and everyone for being here. I think we can jump into the questions. I think we're ready.
Okay.
For sure.
Yeah.
So, so here are the questions that we have that have been submitted. Can you tell us more about this idea of plant invisibility in our current age? And, you know, it kind of relates to one question that I was going to ask, but I think you've sort of addressed it. Like, how's your relationship to nature shifted after making this Earthen Door? But if you want to, you know, address that through the idea of plant invisibility.
I mean, I think both Leah and I are much more attuned to the natural world, and we think of going back to the pandemic, which it was very material, working with these plants and this process, being out in the sun and the rain and bringing the plates in at night and out in the morning, and just understanding that, you know, slowing down has been key. Slowing down time. We keep mentioning time in the project, but if you're exposing something for 2 months, you're very much with that plant and thinking about it and then researching it. So the plant invisibility, this has been counter to that for the two of us. I think that has changed us, that we see plants and we're curious about them. Whenever we teach a workshop, we use an app called Picture This, where we, with our students, will just show them how easy it is to take a photo, and it gives you all this data information on the plant. It names it and it gives it its Latin name and it gives it a little, you know, how to tend to it, and maybe a little history on it. So we love that element that you can be well, I'm in Brooklyn, so in Brooklyn, walking around and get to know what the trees are, the plants that are growing in your urban area. And you just feel, I don't know, more alive and closer to nature. It's a unique thing to name them. And I think that in Dickinson's era, that would have been, everybody knew what everything was called, but we've lost that to a degree.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've noticed in this project, well, there's many, but in thinking about, that the prairie piece, that whole wall of color that incorporates so many of the plants in our project, there is something that has a different resonance with the pure pigment from the plants as opposed to synthetic color. And so again, for us, that really kind of paying attention to plants, in terms of what's growing, how we're growing it, where it's growing, why it's growing, what its significance. And then that second element of just extracting the color. I mean, for me, everywhere I go now, I'll like pick up a little petal if I see it and see what color it extracts. It's always different depending on where you are in location, and just that sort of paying attention to the world around us. And I think we've lost that in a way. So, for us, this plant invisibility, this idea to reconnect with just what's happening around you, and thinking about color in a different way. That these plants are growing all around us, and the color that we were able to get out of them, I think was really powerful. We would always call each other, Zoom with each other to check in and say, look at this amazing blue that I got, or this incredible pink from this rose. And so it connects you in a different way to what's happening around you.
In describing your project to
Oops.
people, what you just said, Leah, reminds me that when we first exhibited it at photo fairs and then again at AIPAD, more recently, the reaction to the works is so strong that it's almost the opposite of plant invisibility. It becomes about plant awakening. People really relate to the color and the vibrancy of the works, and even the really subtle ones as well, because I think that they are organic, and I think that we relate to that work on a very basic level. There's a intuitive sense that this color is real, that it's nature-based, it's plant-based, and you've done an amazing job of capturing it. We have a couple more questions. I think we've covered this, but maybe you can talk about how you anticipate the anthotypes themselves, the unique prints, may evolve over time. What have you seen in terms of the evolution of those prints since you've made them?
Well, some of the drastic changes of fading very quickly, especially we've learned the greens, fade, the chlorophyll, more chlorophyll based ones, ferns and leaves. But the flowers, some are dyes, like Leah, the pokeberry, right, is so much a dye and is still as good as it was when we made it. But there is definitely a fading in many of them.
Right.
Yeah, we store them in a light tight box, and they have a life of their own. They're just shifting and fading even without seeing the sun. And we check on them periodically. I think maybe that's a whole other project, but this kind of evolution of the originals to what they are now. So like Amanda said, the greens that are faded really quickly, that was also our shortest exposure. That was the one that took 1 hour in the sunlight. So you can kind of see the correlation of how quickly something exposes to how quickly it disappears.
But they still smell great, the boxes.
Yeah.
When we open them.
Oh, that's interesting. Never
Yeah.
even occurred to me.
Yes, really like summer. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
it's
it's really,
open the box.
yeah. I mean, in making this work, you're really operating with so many of your senses, like the physicality of growing and planting these flowers, and then living with the smell of them, and when we're mashing them up with a mortar and pestle, they make their own kind of smell with the alcohol. So it really is immersive in that way.
And the last question we have is, I think related to the herbarium pages that you worked with. How did you decide on which plant shapes to work with? Which I assume that is pointing back to the herbarium pages. So were there, particular pages that spoke to you more than others?
I think that what is hard sometimes, even in all the information we're giving, is that we are working with photographs of her book. So each page is a page of her book. Page 1, made with a wild strawberry pigment from a wild strawberry that we culled, is page 1 of her herbarium with maybe 5 plants on it. There's different species on every page. So each page, page 2, is made with a different pigment, and it's her book with her handwriting. So we're not pressing plants in hers. We did that at the Brandywine for those pieces where we pressed our own, but that was a bit of a departure. For this project, we worked with an archival, the archive at Harvard. Houghton Library has the whole archive there, a digital archive, and that's what we use to make our plant prints. So hope that clarifies.
And that brings up another question, which I think we've talked about in the past. Is there a direct correlation between the pigment that you use, the plant pigment that you used for each page, and the content of the page? Like, does wild strawberry appear on page 1?
No, we were more wedded to this kind of blooming cycle. So when we started the project, the first page of the herbarium, we went in numerical order in a way in the beginning, I think. And that was based on what was growing. So, at some point there was probably a departure from that, just because this took more than a year to make, because the exposures were so long and sometimes we would have to redo them. So it was less about matching what was growing. Like, for example, behind Amanda, you can see the marigold that we use. That's the pigment, but there's no marigold represented on that particular page. There's a marigold in the herbarium of all 424 specimens, but it would have been too complicated to try to match because there's so many specimens. So instead, I think Amanda said this earlier, that we sort of set up some guidelines for ourselves that what we used had to have been grown in the Dickinson garden and represented in the herbarium. So that's how we kind of narrowed down to the 66. And also it was the early pandemic when we started this project, so not everything was accessible. For some of them, we had to use species that were analogous, similar. And also, there are ones that are rare and endangered. So we had to make some little departures because of that.
Well, I think we've reached the end of our allotted time here. So I just want to thank everyone for signing up and joining us. And again, want to thank AIPAD for the support of the project. And to you, Amanda and Leah, it's been a wonderful ride so far, and I know we've got a lot more to go with it. But and again, to the audience, if you have any questions about the project, or you would like to see an online viewing room of the images, images in the portfolio, please let me know, and we're going to see if we can do this one more time.
Supposed to be exploding hearts coming from your hands. It's not working.
Well, yeah, one more here. There we go. Everybody, thank you so much.
You did it.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, you did it.
So feel free to reach out, and thank you.